Hello guys, welcome to our channel. Today we will discuss the important topic of polity, international relations and current affairs, that is G20. As you all know that this topic is important for GS2 of UPSC and current affairs and international relations for other examinations. For the past 1 year, when you heard about the G20, India's presidency and other things in the newspapers, you people might have confused about various other organizations like G7, G8, G20, etc. So in this video, I will give a brief about G7, G8 and G20, its functioning and the various outcomes of the current summit being held in India. So in 1975, the world has experienced its first oil shock, which has led to a financial crisis. So in 1975, the world's top 6 wealthiest economies, Germany, UK, France, US, Italy and Japan, has met together to discuss the financial crisis and various steps to be taken for the future. And in 1976, this Canada has been added. From then onwards, this group of countries have been known as group of 7, G7. So basically this G7 is an intergovernmental political forum. They are the world's largest IMF advanced economies and the wealthiest liberal democracies. I mean, during the formation, they account for almost 60% of GDP. At present, these 7 countries account for over 50% of global net wealth, which is equals to $418 trillion. They account for almost 32 to 46% of global GDP, and they account to around 10% of world's population. So this G7 became G8 in the 20th summit in 1998 after they added Russia into the group. But Russia was removed in 2014 due to its annexation of Crimea. So initially it was G6 in 1975, later it became G7, then it became G8 in 1998 and it became G7 again in 2014. So this G7 discusses various issues like economic growth, inflation, unemployment, etc. At first it started discussing about economic policies. Initially, G7 was founded primarily to facilitate shared macroeconomic initiatives in response to the various economic problems. From 1980s, G7 has broadened its areas of concern and included various issues like international security, human rights. In 1995, most of the South Asian economies like South Korea, Indonesia, China, India have seen an average growth rate of 7%. These prospering economies have faced a depreciation of local currency and stock markets in 1997, also known as Great Asian Financial Crisis. In 97 and 98, some South Asian countries like South Korea, Indonesia, Thailand, etc. have seen a depreciation of currencies of around 30%. In case of Indonesia, the depreciation was around 83%. Along with the currencies, stock markets in these countries have fallen down. In Indonesia, Thailand, and South Korea, the stock market fell by around 50% in 97 and 98. So this all led to the bank failures, unemployment and some social unrest is observed in these countries. So this financial crisis has shown its impact in developed nations. These South Asian economies were also known as tiger economies. So this great financial crisis is also known as financial crisis of Asian tigers. In 1 year, economy of Thailand fell by 10%, whereas economy of South Korea fell by 5.8% and economy of Indonesia fell by 13%, whereas 1 year before they were forecasted for an average growth of 7%. And this financial crisis was discussed in G7 meeting in 1999. And to promote the financial stability and strengthen the global economy, G20 was created in 1999. So from 1999 onwards, the central bank governors of the top 20 economies and the finance ministers of these economies met regularly to discuss international financial and monetary cooperation. So from 1999, central bank governors and finance ministers of the top 20 economies have met regularly to discuss the global economic and financial stability. Before the outbreak of global financial crisis in 2008, G20 meetings were held to discuss international financial and monetary cooperation, formation of international financial institutions, and issues surrounding economic development of top 20 nations. So, after the 2008 global financial crisis of Lehman Brothers, G20 was upgraded to level of heads of the state. Since 2008, it has convened at least once a year, with summits involving each member's head of the government, a state, foreign minister, finance minister, and other high-ranking officials. So, G20 is comprised of most of the world's largest economies, including both industrialized and developing nations. They account for around 90% of the world's gross domestic product and 75 to 80% of international trade. They account for two-thirds of global population and roughly half of the world's land area. G20 is the premier forum for international economic cooperation. To ensure that global economic forums and institutions work together, international organizations like United Nations, IMF, World Bank, WHO, etc. also participate in the G20 meetings. Along with these organizations, G20 each year invites some guest countries also. Here you can see the G20 nations, and to the right side you can see the invitees for 2023 G20 Summit. So let us look into the structure and functioning of G20. G20 basically has two tracks, a finance track and a Sherpa track. This finance track is led by the finance ministers and central bank governors of the member countries. Its main focus areas are fiscal and monetary policy issues such as global economy, infrastructure, financial inclusion, etc. They meet 4 times a year, with 2 meetings being held on the sidelines of World Bank and IMF meetings. Whereas the Sherpa track is led by Sherpas. Sherpas are nothing but personal emissaries of leaders of the G20 nations. Their main focus area is socio-economic issues such as agriculture, anti-corruption, climate, digital economy, education, employment, etc. The Sherpas usually oversee the negotiations over the course of the year, discussing the agenda items for the summit and coordinating the substantive work for G20. G20 doesn't have a permanent charter or a secretariat. To ensure the continuity of its summits and meetings, presidency of G20 is supported by Troika. This includes previous, current and incoming presidencies. Current Troika comprises of Indonesia, India and Brazil. The decisions made in G20 are not legally binding and member countries are not required to implement them. Usually, the 19 countries are divided into 5 groups, each having not more than 4 countries. So, the presidency rotates between each group, and within each group, the member countries decide who will go for the presidency that year. India is in group 2, grouped with Russia, South Africa and Turkey. India's G20 presidency began on 1st December 2022. The theme of India's G20 presidency is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or One Earth, One Family and One Future. It is drawn from the ancient Sanskrit text of Maha Upanishad. Currently, G20 Sherpa from India is Amitabh Kant. This year, India has invited 9 countries apart from the various international organizations and its G20 members. They are Bangladesh, Netherlands, Oman, Singapore, Nigeria, Spain and UAE, Egypt and Mauritius. The venue for 2023 summit is Bharat Mandapam of International Exhibition Convention Center in Pragati Maidan of New Delhi. We all know that India's cultural wealth is a rich confluence of its ancient history, art, music, dance, architecture, cuisine, and more. Hosting of the G20 Summit by India presented an exceptional opportunity to exhibit its cultural richness through diverse elements. It can be observed in many forms in the present G20 Summit. For example, the venue Bharat Mandapam in New Delhi used for the summit is inspired by Lord Basaveshwara's concept of Anubhav Mandapam. See, Lord Basaveshwara is a 12th century Indian philosopher reformer who attempted to create a casteless society. He fought against caste and religious discriminations. Lord Basaveshwara built Anubhav Mandapam, which is a common forum for all to discuss prevailing problems of socio-economic and political strata. The Bharat Mandapam also has a cultural corridor which displays the diverse traditions from the 29 countries, including India and the special invitees of the G20. A replica of historic Nalanda University, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Bihar, served as a backdrop as President Draupadi Murmu and Prime Minister Narendra Modi welcomed the guests at the ceremonial dinner for G20. This Nalanda University embraces diversity, meritocracy, freedom of opinion, group governance, autonomy, and knowledge sharing, all of which are fundamental tenets of democracy. Also, Konar Chakra of Odisha's Sun Temple was used as a backdrop during the summit. 24 spoke Konark wheel, which represents India's historical wisdom, modern civilization, and architectural brilliance, is also incorporated into the country's flag. It serves as a potent representation of democratic will, demonstrating the tenacity of democratic values and dedication to social progress achieved by India. Along with these, the other notable elements that showcasing the cultural richness of India during the G20 summit were the Chola-style bronze statue of Lord Nataraja, showcase of Tanjore paintings and Dokra art, brass statue of Lord Buddha under the Bodhi tree, Hindustani folk and Carnatic musical heritage of India. Along with these, there was a G20 cultural gala and exhibition at National Museum. All these events were a testament to India's glorious legacy and heritage. Here you can find the name of the heads that have attended the G20 summit from various countries. Notable exceptions were China and Russia. Except China and Russia, all other heads of countries have participated in the G20 summit. Under the Indian presidency, G20 in 2023 will focus on the theme One Earth, One Family and One Future. This theme affirms the value of human, animal, plant, and microorganisms and their interconnectedness on planet Earth and in wider universe. Accordingly, 6 agendas were put forth for the G20 Dialogue 2023. Green development, climate finance, and lifestyle for environment, accelerated inclusive and resilient growth, accelerated progress on sustainable development goals, technology transformation and digital public infrastructure, multilateral institutions for the 21st century, women-led development. As already discussed, working groups will focus on areas like agriculture, security, anti-corruption, culture, digital economy, environment, climate sustainability, etc. Now we will look into some of the major outcomes of the current G20 summit. The historic outcome of G20 Delhi Summit 2023 is inclusion of Africa Union as a permanent member of G20, which is a major step towards increasing the representation of developing countries in the forum. African Union is an intergovernmental organization comprising of 55 member states in African continent. Its headquarters is located in Addis Ababa. They collectively possess a substantial GDP of $3 trillion. The move for inclusion of African Union is proposed by India in June 2023. And it is welcomed by African Union and other G20 members. Inclusion of African Union in G20 is an achievement of India's presidency and reflects its commitment to developmental agenda of the global south. Africa, also one of the fastest growing regions in the world with expected growth rate of 4.1% in 2023. So, Africa's voice and perspective are essential for addressing global challenges like poverty eradication, climate change, health, peace and security. For Africa, G20 provides a platform to advance its common interests on global stage like operationalization of African continent's free trade area, its climate finance, technology transfer, etc. It also offers a fresh momentum for India-African relationship, which has increased several crusts and troughs recently. Inclusion of African Union offers a fresh momentum for India-African relationship, which has increased several crusts and troughs recently. With the move to include African Union, India has pitched itself as a leader of developing and underdeveloping countries. This is also in sync with India's aspiration for permanent membership in United Nations Security Council, for which India is keen to have support from Africa, which has 55 votes. Also, Africa is a resource-rich nation with resources like crude oil, gas, pulses, gold, etc., all of which India lacks in. Another groundbreaking initiative of the G20 summit is the launch of Global Biofuel Alliance. It is an India-led initiative in coordination with Brazil and US and 9 initiating members. The main aim is promoting and accelerating the adoption of biofuels and expanding the bioenergy access in emerging economies. In the G20 summit, 19 countries and the 12 international organizations have already agreed to join the summit. Of the 12 international organizations, major organizations like World Bank, Asian Development Bank, World Economic Forum, etc. have already agreed to join the Global Biofuel Alliance. So this Global Biofuel Alliance will help in promoting the adoption of biofuels in the emerging economies for a sustainable future. It will help in reducing the dependence on petroleum products and the countries which are already dependent on crude oil. If you look into the countries that have initiated the Global Biofuel Alliance, most of them are emerging economies like Brazil, India, Argentina, which are mostly dependent on crude oil. This will help in transfer of technology from already emerged economies like US and other countries for the development of biofuels. Of these, India, Brazil, and US accounts for around 85% of global ethanol production and 81% of ethanol consumption. So, how will this GBA help India? With the help of GBA, India will be able to provide Indian industries with opportunities to export the technology and equipment for production of biofuels. It will also help India in achieving the ethanol blending target of 20% by 2024-25. Actually, the ethanol blend, India has already achieved the ethanol blending target of 10%, and it was supposed to achieve the target of 20% by 2030. But Government of India has advanced the target for 20% ethanol blending in petrol to 2025. So, with the help of GBA and the technology transfer from the country involved, India can achieve this ethanol blending target of 20% by 2024-25. So, you might be having a question, what is this ethanol blending? So, ethanol is one of the principal biofuels which is naturally produced by the fermentation of sugars by yeast or via petrochemical processes such as ethylene hydration. So, ethanol blending is nothing but blending ethanol into gasoline, which will help in reducing the amount of petrol required for running the automobiles. So, which will directly help in reducing the dependence on imported, expensive, and polluting petroleum. For example, today India imports around 85% of its oil requirements. So, India's net import was around 185 million tons in 2020-21 at a cost of around $51 billion. So, achieving the blending target of E20, it can save India around $4 billion annually. Apart from this, GBA will also help in accelerating India's existing biofuel programs such as PM G1 Yojana, Sustainable Alternative Towards Affordable Transportation, and Gobardhan Scheme. Another initiative that was launched during the G20 Summit was the establishment of India Middle East Europe corridor. So, regarding this, an MOU was signed between India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, European Union, France, Italy, and Germany. This IMEC is a part of Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, which is a collaborative effort by G7 nations to fund infrastructure projects in developing nations. So, basically, this IMEC is a network of transport corridors which consists of railway lines, sea lanes to promote economic integration between Asia, Persian Gulf, and Europe. So, the proposed corridor consists of two separate corridors, Eastern Corridor and Northern Corridor. Eastern Corridor will connect India and the Arabian Gulf, whereas Northern Corridor connects Arabian Gulf, and Europe. So, this will involve transit by ship between India and Saudi Arabia, followed by a rail link to UAE and likely to Jordan, from where the shipment will move to Turkey via sea and further by rail in Europe. So, along with the railway track and the sea lanes, cables for energy and digital connectivity, as well as pipeline for clean hydrogen export also will be laid in this project. So, how is it important to India? First of all, IMEC is a counter to China's Belt and Road Initiative project. It will also help India to counter the growing Chinese geopolitical influence. As already, China's geopolitical influence has been growing in the Middle East region. Recently, it has helped to broker a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So, Saudi Arabia and UAE, who are both the old allies of United States, have been strengthening their ties with China recently. So, with the help of this IMEC, it provides opportunity to counter the growing Chinese geopolitical influence. And it will also bring the Middle East together and establish the region as a hub for economic activity. Also, This proposed corridor would increase the trade of manufactured goods and facilitate the development of clean energy. It would save costs and promote economic cohesion, create jobs, etc. in the region of Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. India has been heavily dependent on Chabar port of Iran for transport of its goods to Afghanistan and European countries. So, with the help of this IMEC, it would lessen the burden of India to depend too much on Chabar port. It also breaks Pakistan's monopoly over India's overland connectivity to the west. According to a US report, this economic corridor will make trade between India and Europe 40% faster. One future alliance and creation of global digital public infrastructure repository. So this One Future Alliance is a voluntary initiative which is aimed in providing technical assistance for implementing digital public infrastructure and in low and middle income countries. So at the heart of this alliance is the power of technology to improve governance and people's lives. So in G20 Summit, a voluntary and a suggested framework for development and deployment of global digital public infrastructure has been accepted by all the G20 members. It will be helpful and powerful financial inclusion mechanism for the countries of global southern economies. World Bank has prepared a report, G20 Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion document. Financial inclusion is nothing but ensuring access to financial services to vulnerable groups at affordable cost. So in the document released by World Bank, it has appreciated the effort of India's digital public infrastructure over the past decade. As per the report, India's DPI has achieved a 47 years worth of financial inclusion progress in just 6 years. This has been done with the help of JAM Trinity, Jandan Aadhaar Mobile Trinity. It has boosted the financial inclusion rate from 25% in 2008 to 80% in 6 years. Pradhan Mantri Jandan Yojana accounts have tripled from 147.2 million in 2015 March to 462 million in 2022 June, of which women own 56% of these accounts. So India's digital G2P facilitated $361 billion of transfers to beneficiaries from 53 ministries. So it helped in saving around $33 billion by March 2022, which is equivalent to 1.14% of GDP of India. UPI transactions in financial year 22-23 has neared around 50% of India's nominal GDP. Also, this document talked about lower compliance costs for KYC, cross-border payments like UPI Pay Now with Singapore, data empowerment and protection architecture. G20 countries have committed to work towards tripling the renewable energy capacity globally by 2030. As per International Energy Agency, if the above targets are met, it will avoid carbon dioxide emissions by 7 billion tons between now and 2030. Though there are several challenges in achieving this target, G20 countries have committed to work towards achieving the target. However, the group did not provide any plan to amend the existing policies and targets to achieving the target. At the end of the summit, the leaders at India's G20 Summit arrived at a joint communique called G20 New Delhi Leaders Declaration. It was signed with 100% consensus by all the member countries. This is a remarkable achievement. Even though previous G20 Summit have achieved the 100% consensus, but G20 Summit 2023 is significant because of the geopolitical tension between Russia and Ukraine and the involvement of Russia in the G20. Majority of the nations expected that it would be difficult to achieve 100% consensus. The declaration said that the leaders acknowledged the impact of the war on global food and energy security, supply chains, macro financial stability, inflation, and growth. The Russia-Ukraine paragraphs in the G20 declaration did not condemn Russia for its actions, nor did it call it an aggression. But the West also has got what it wanted. For example, a statement on the conflict says that all states must refrain from conquering terrorists by force. The statement never spoke about the Russia, but Russia is the only country to have done so. The achievement of 100% consensus, considering the global geopolitical tensions, shows that India as a global power which has an ability to bring countries together. Not many countries are in a position to negotiate as India has done. It has taken comments from each other nation to work out a compromising proposal. This shows the achievement of India as a global power. The declaration has been divided into 10 chapters as shown below. It talks about global economic growth, which is below its long run average and remains uneven due to uncertainty in global financial conditions and debt vulnerabilities, persistent inflation, and geoeconomic tensions around the world, which reiterates that to achieve strong, sustainable, balanced, and inclusive growth, policymakers to stay agile and as flexible as possible. It also talks about how policies that enable trade and investment serve as an engine of growth and prosperity, and G20 leaders are committed to do it. At the midway point to 2020, Sustainable Development Goals are off the track as only 12% of the goals are on track. G20 leaders recommitted to accelerate and achieve progress towards a sustainable development goal. Green Development Pact for a Sustainable Future. It stresses the need to implement clean, sustainable, just affordable and inclusive energy transitions. One important mention is to build a reliable, diverse, responsible, and sustainable value chains for critical minerals, semiconductors, and related technologies. Regarding multilateral institutions, it speaks of reforming international financial institutions. One of the most important elements in this is to reform United Nations Security Council. It was agreed for the first time in the G20. And there was a strong push towards reform for better, bigger, and more effective multilateral development banks. The chapter on technology transformation contains elements of building digital public infrastructure, crypto assets, and harnessing artificial intelligence responsibly. They also talk about the innovative regulatory or governance approach that takes into account the risks associated with the use of artificial intelligence. G20 leaders also agreed for a digital public infrastructure and global digital public infrastructure repository. The document also talks about comprehensive toolkit which is aimed at improving cyber education, cyber awareness for protection and empowerment of children and youth. The declaration talks about gender equality is of fundamental importance and that investing in the empowerment of all women and girls has a multiplier effect in the implementing of the 2030 agenda. On terrorism, G20 leaders condemned all forms of terrorism and committed to meet the needs of Financial Action Task Force. The G20 summit concluded successfully by handing over G20 presidency to Brazil by India. Even though India is a president till 30th November 2023. India has conducted over 200 meetings in 60 cities across India and has set a new template and a high bar for taking G20 to the people. If you like our video, please subscribe to our channel. For any suggestions or modifications, please do comment below. Thank you.